Hello again, everyone. This is the New Testament is Fake series. This is lesson number 170, and the date is November 25th, 2018. My lesson is titled, When He Comes. A simple thought here today, as we've got the newer religion, newer to me at least, because I was in Christianity from I was a child. Little did I realize there was a Hebrew Israelite religion on earth all that time when I was a child. I knew there was Judaism, but I didn't know at the time as a small boy that there was Hebrew Israelitism, which to me is only black Judaism. But now that I understand this Hebrew Israelite stuff that I got cornered in mentally for a short time, I understand that there is a very strong teaching by Messianic believers who teach that the Messiah, the Hebrew Messiah, Jesus or Yeshua and other similar names, will be their salvation when He comes. Although it's not quite clear sometimes, what tense they are speaking in. It seems because He is supposedly God, He fills all tenses like the past, present, and future. No wonder the New Testament says, I am He who was and is to come. But it seems like He was the deliverance that was hoped for, and He was that would be future for the people in the Old Testament who were looking forward to Him. Then in the present time when the people lived who He supposedly came to, in the time of the Romans, for their present while they was alive, He was their deliverance once He was there walking on the streets with them of Jerusalem. But He left them and they went on to dream and teach about Him being the deliverance when He comes. So when the Torah prophets first prophesied about Him, supposedly, He was the deliverer that they looked forward to. While He was here walking Jerusalem, supposedly, they would say He is the deliverer. But after they saw Him killed on a cross, then they went on dreaming by saying He will be the deliverer when He comes again. I'm not sure how you can have faith in a God who dies at the hands of mortal men and still continue to not be interfered with in your mental processes while thinking that God will deliver you. But I note that, as I've said many times before, the Torah God is never put in a situation where man can slap Him up, beat Him up, draw blood from Him as they put thorns on Him and whip Him, flog Him, and so on. And mortal man would just do all that stuff to Him. The Torah God does not put Himself like that in the hands of man. I am certain that if He did, the Romans would not have been the first one to get their hands on the Hebrew God Yah in order to bloody Him up like that and do all that stuff to Him. But the Hebrews themselves would have beat the Romans to it and beat up their own God. Because when you look at how they beat up the prophets, throwing them in prison and so on, and doing whatever they wanted to do, roughing up the prophets, they tried to kill Jeremiah. If it wasn't for his God, he would not have survived. So the Hebrews themselves beating up their own people, they would have definitely beat up their own God if it was true that Elohim could be beat up and taken down, especially when they didn't want to keep his Torah. They would have beat him up and get him out of the way. In fact, they told Isaiah, get you out of the way so that we can do what we want to do, because they were choosing other gods. Right? I mean, they did anything they wanted to. Nehemiah was grabbing other people and beating them up. Right? Elijah killed hundreds of prophets of Israel who were identified in the text as the prophets of Baal. So we know that these prophets, these men of Israel, were not going to just play around when they wanted something. If they could have gotten their hands on the Hebrew God, they would have done it. So if the mysteries of heaven and earth are placed in the Torah, which was deposited in the mind of the Israelite, why would they not figure out a way to get a hold of their God? But the Romans were able to get their hands on the God of Israel, called the Messiah, because they do teach that he is God, just like the Christians do. So because the Hebrews of the Old Testament could not get their hands on an unseen God, then they put their hands on the men who were prophesying for him. But somehow the Romans, who the mysteries of the Torah were not given to, were able to figure out how to get their hands on the Hebrew God, or the Son of God, or the Son God, the Messiah, who, as the Hebrews Messianic ones teach, was the one who made everything that we see on earth, because they say that the Most High created Jesus as the first spirit, and then he made everything else. So they're trying to tell you effectively he is the creator, this Messiah. Hebrews could not handle the Messiah physically, but the Romans didn't just handle him, they beat him up and killed him in the end. And put him in a tomb. He couldn't even get out with this big stone they placed over it, that it took his father to send an angel to supposedly deliver him, or to at least move the stone so they could see he was no longer there. But they teach us in these messianic teachings that the prophets of the Old Testament prophesied that when this Messiah comes, he will deliver the children of Israel. You're still crying today in your captivities all over the earth and waiting for deliverance because he has not yet returned. I am not sure why there is need for a return when he already came to you. Because if you read the prophecies of these false prophets of the Torah who told you about this Messiah who was going to come, it will let you get the understanding for the careful thinking person that they were talking about a coming of a Messiah. Now it's wrong, but I'm just wording it the way you have been taught. They were not talking about a repeated appearance, a repeated coming, a coming and going and then a coming again. They, according to the teaching, the Messianic teachings, were teaching that when he comes, there will be deliverance. Think of like Zechariah and think of like Daniel. That when he comes, this is what's going to go on. It doesn't matter how you work out the 6th, 9th, and 70th week. Everybody, even from a child, even as I was a child and heard these teachings of the prophecy of Daniel with the 6th, 9th, and 70th week, always understood by the strong teaching of the prophecy of Daniel that when the Messiah gets here, there will be deliverance for Israel. But once it is seen that the deliverance didn't quite happen the way the prophecy said, then other pushed to the back scene explanations have to now be brought forward and magnified to say, well, there would be a break between the 6th, the 9th, and the 70th week, and the 70th week is going to happen later. You see, for every prophecy in the Bible, there are multiple explanations that are kept redundant. They are kept on a low key and put in like a big bag. And you just pull out one every time you need to, when the conventional or traditional teaching does not fly anymore with the people. Because when people see what's going on in the world and they understand it's not quite happening and they're losing faith in God and losing faith in the scriptures, we got to pull for another explanation out of the bag and tell you this is the real understanding of what the prophecies of the Hebrews said. This is a real understanding. But anyway, if you read these prophets, they let you understand that when this Messiah comes, that they were dreaming of, there will be deliverance. But Jesus came, died, and left after they killed him, and his father had to resurrect him. There was no deliverance, such that they had to flee Jerusalem in about AD 70. There were wars, fightings, rising up against the Romans to free themselves by doing the work that their Messiah should have done to free them according to the prophecies. Read Luke chapter 1, about 69 to verse 72, somewhere there. How it tells you, let me read it. So Luke chapter 1, starting from verse 69, I'll read a few verses. And had raised up an horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. Now, they dropped the ball when they worded it like that, because whenever you saw David on the move when he was raised up, there was going to be salvation. In fact, even before David became king, you could trust that when David went to war, something is going to happen in favor of the children of Israel. Such that even while Saul was still reigning, it would say things like, David, like Saul slews thousands, but David is 10,000s. Showing you that wherever you see David mentioned with some kind of fighting, there was deliverance for Israel. But Jesus came already and there was no deliverance, even though he was a horn of salvation raised up according to the line of David. Something doesn't gel right. But it goes on in verse 70, this will happen as he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began. That we should be saved from our enemies, not running in AD 70 to other parts of Africa, but saved from our enemies. Not running to the Atlas Mountains, but saved from our enemies. Not taking off or trying to find a spot up on Masada in Jericho to try to do a last standoff against the Romans until you starve yourself because you couldn't defend yourself against them, but you will be delivered from your enemies and from the hand of all that hate us. And at that time, the hand would be the hand of the Romans that hated you with swords that they pushed in your belly, of those who were not able to flee in AD 70 and flee from Jerusalem. But it says that from the world began, there was the prophecy that came from God through the prophets that when he comes, he would save you from the hand of all your enemies. But the Hebrews fled. This is what happened in biblical history and in world history, they tell us. Verse 72, from the hand of all that hate us, to perform the mercy promised to our fathers. Now the sword of the Roman going through the Israelites revolting on the streets of Jerusalem did not perform mercy that was promised to their fathers. Did not perform mercy that was promised in the prophecies of Zechariah and of Daniel and all these prophets and Isaiah that you say prophesied that when Jesus the Messiah comes, he would perform the mercy promised to your fathers. And you're still living in America and all the scattered lands, but Jesus came 2,000 years ago and performed the mercy promised to our fathers. Try to work that one out for me. And to remember his holy covenant. So if the sword went into the belly of the Israelite in the streets of Jerusalem, that means the memory was performed, the memory of the covenant. So if they were dying by the sword of the Romans, then God was remembering to kill the Israelite as a part of his covenant unto them. The oath which he swore to our father Abraham, that I will deliver you from your enemies. No, the oath which he swore to our father Abraham, that I will kill you on the streets of Jerusalem, and some of you will flee from the Romans and manage to survive. That's the oath lived out in real life to our father Abraham. But when you are being religious, the oath might sound like other things, like I will bless you and make you great and multiply your seed. But when you are in real time living on earth and you see the Romans charging at you, the oath actually plays out different. You will be destroyed. But there are still Israelites looking for this Hebrew Messiah, for a deliverance from him when he comes. Verse 74, that he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear. Every Hebrew prophet that ever prophesied that and that teaches that today are teaching a great lie. Because he did not grant unto us that we being delivered, that we would be delivered out of the hand of our enemies, but have remained in the hand of our enemies until this day. It is 2018 about to turn into 2019 in another month and a half. But you believe it because you must believe the teachings of the scriptures, Old and New Testament. Because the Bible is true. But this he will do so that we'll be delivered out of the hand of our enemies, and that we might serve him without fear. But you're worrying about getting into FEMA camps. One sister posted up on Twitter a couple months ago, she's afraid of, pardon me for saying it here, but like you're adults, afraid of getting raped when the war breaks out in America. But why be afraid, my good sister? Because he will deliver you out of the hand of your enemies, that you will serve him without fear. In holiness and righteousness before him all the days of your life. And that means he's reversing the fear that you will have in the curse from Deuteronomy 28. That says you're going to fear everything under the sun, basically. From your waking up in the morning to your going down to sleep at night. Fear will grip you. I'll skip a verse and go down to verse 77. To give knowledge of salvation unto his people by the remission of their sins. This is what the Hebrew Messiah did. When he came 2,000 years ago, he gave the knowledge of salvation. That's why you can teach the knowledge about his teachings and about his life. Because you don't have the salvation that it should produce, his coming should produce. You just have the knowledge of it. The knowledge of the salvation that should be given unto his people by the remission of their sins. That's why some Hebrews baptize in water like the Christians do. Because they are going according to the knowledge or the teaching of how to get saved. Go baptize in water. So that's it for that one. Now let me read from Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40 and 41 to show you how long they waited for salvation back in the days of biblical Egypt. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. Now I know there's all kinds of fancy explanations. They weren't really there in Egyptian bondage for 400 years. It says 430, and that whole 430 is not for no captivity in Egypt, because you're dealing with Abraham being done there first and whatever and blah blah blah. But notice here that it specifies who did the sojourning. It was the sojourning of the children of Israel. The children or the descendants of Israel. Abraham was not a descendant of Israel. Abraham was not an Israelite. That's why sometimes in some of my lessons you hear me use a term like the pre-Israelite patriarchs or so on. Because I've been letting you know for a while now that some of these people, although we normally say it, are really not Israelites, and you know that. So you can't count from no Abraham or whoever was there before the church of Israel. The church of Israel are talking about the whole group that had grown up into the millions to become a strong, mighty nation that the Egyptians were threatened by their numbers, according to what the text is saying to us. So the children of Israel is that large group that finally grew up. So it says that these children of Israel, they sojourned there not for 400 years or 200 years or so on, but for 430 years. The children of Israel, the grown-up nation, the big group of people in the millions, they sojourned for 430 years. Why are you taught about a 400-year deliverance? Because it's not counting from Abraham. He was not an Israelite and has nothing to do with Israel. Or then tell me why Adam is not a child of Israel, or Noah is not a child of Israel. Because if you're saying Abraham paved the way for the children of Israel through Isaac and Jacob, then didn't Noah pave the way for Abraham to come on the scene later on? And didn't Adam pave the way? Because without Adam, there could not have been a Noah. Noah was a descendant of Adam. Noah was not an Israelite. He was an Adamite. So if you say, well, Isaac and Jacob were children of Abraham, so that makes Abraham some kind of an Israelite, then if Noah and Abraham were children of Adam, then they are Adamites, and all the children of Israel would then be Adamites, just like Noah and just like Abraham and just like Isaac and just like Jacob. The only man to have met God before any religious teaching happened on earth, according to the Torah, is Adam. And Adam never worshipped God. Adam did not believe in God. Adam did not teach about God in any religious setting. He never read from a book. He never taught from a book. He didn't worship God. He didn't offer sacrifices. Nobody did that at the start. But later on, after the fall of man, then you see his children offering sacrifices, because sacrifices came with Cain and Abel, because earth had already fallen and they were out of the garden. So outside the garden, a fallen system of sacrifices began to happen by people who were not running by initial information that Adam had about God. Adam never sacrificed and never worshipped God. Adam did not push God. He didn't push the knowledge of God. Adam did not do any of that stuff. Adam did not believe in God. The text lets you know that he simply met who the text is identifying as the creator. But in no way did Adam teach you that the creator should actually be worshipped. He never worshipped the creator. But a religion started up in the time of his children, and they began to worship something that was called a god. Adam simply met the Creator, according to what the book is telling us. So someone in the time of his children, Cain and Abel, came up with a religion about sacrifices unto God, and then later on Hebrew prophets came up that built a religion out of that and said, we are waiting for the son of this God worshipped by Cain and Abel, because not even Eve offered sacrifices. So Adam and Eve don't even participate in the religion and the sacrifices of their own children, because they knew the truth that was in Eden. They never did sacrifices. But their children who did not know the Creator, they started a religion and started to do sacrifices, and eventually a prophecy came out later on that his son of the God of sacrifices will show up. And you're still looking for him, even though he came and didn't fulfill. So verse 41 from Exodus 12. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self same day, it came to pass, all the hosts of the Lord, meaning the children of Israel now, went out from the land of Egypt. The self same day, meaning that the supposed God of the Hebrews planned stuff so well that the writer had to say the self same day they were delivered. Letting you know that the God of the Torah, when he gets ready for deliverance, he plans out the whole scheme of things so that it runs by a certain timeline. There is no break, just like the self same day they were delivered. In other words, right away, when he began to move, they were delivered. But you got 69 weeks that need to break for 2,000 years. And there's going to be another week that happens after 2,000 years when he comes back. But the self same day, the first major deliverance precept from Egypt, showing it is the first precept that deals with a major, massive, mighty deliverance. Not the deliverance of one man, like Abraham running down to save Lot, Abraham with a few of his buddies. But the first mighty major deliverance of the massive group of people called Israel, the precept shows that the self same day, in other words, right away when their God moved to deliver them, the self same day there came out, right away they came out. Which may not necessarily mean the same 12-hour period of the sun shining, or the same 24-hour period, whichever one you like to deal with. But it just means in the same time period of the activity of God, the deliverance activity of God, in that move of God, they were delivered. So that this God didn't let up off the Egyptians until they were delivered. So self-same day could then be looked at as the self-same operation of deliverance, the self-same carrying out of a move to deliver his people. So right away they were delivered. But Jesus, the Hebrew Messiah, came 2,000 years ago and is still looking for deliverance from him when he comes again. Yet we understand from the scripture and from history, although much of it has been falsified, that Jesus came and he left his children, the children of Israel, left his people in the clutches of their enemies, left them alone in the death grip of the Romans. And you still got Hebrew Israelites looking for deliverance one day from this same Messiah when he comes.